The father's justice. The call came just as the sun was settling over the lake, painting the water in quiet shades of gold and copper. The kind of evening I had spent 32 years working toward. I almost didn't answer. But when I saw Lauren's name on the screen, something in me already knew this wouldn't be a casual conversation. "Richard," she said, her voice smooth, controlled, the way people speak when they've already decided the outcome. "We need to talk about the lake house." I leaned back in the chair on my dock, the wood still warm from the day's heat. "I just got here yesterday," I said calmly. "What about it?" There was a brief pause, not hesitation, calculation. "My parents are moving in," she said. No question, no discussion, just a statement, as if she were informing me of a delivery time. I didn't respond right away. The wind moved across the lake in slow ripples. A loon called somewhere in the distance. And for a moment, I wondered if I had heard her wrong. "I'm sorry," I said finally. "What did you just say?" "Daniel agrees," she continued, ignoring my question completely. "They can't stay at our place anymore. It's too crowded and they need somewhere quiet. Your house is perfect. 3 bedrooms, right?" I set my coffee down carefully on the small wooden table beside me. "Lauren," I said, keeping my voice even, "I didn't agree to that." Another pause. "This one is sharper." "You don't need to agree," she replied. "This is about family helping family." There it was. That phrase, always dressed up like something noble. But somehow, it only ever moved in one direction. I looked out across the water again, watching the last light stretch thin over the surface. "I just bought this place," I said. "I live here." "You're one person," she shot back, the softness gone now. "Rattling around in all that space. It makes sense for them to stay there for a few months." "A few months," I repeated quietly. "They're landing Friday," she added. "You can pick them up in Duluth." The words landed heavier than they should have. Not because of what she was asking, but because of how easily she assumed it was already decided. "Did Daniel actually agree to this?" I asked. A slight shift in her tone, irritation now, barely hidden. "Daniel understands that sometimes people have to make sacrifices," she said, "unlike some others." I let that sit between us. 32 years, overtime shifts, missed weekends, cold lunches eaten alone on job sites. And somehow, I was still the one expected to give more. "Lauren," I said slowly, "you didn't ask me, you informed me." "And I'm informing you now," she replied, her voice tightening, "because my parents need a place to stay. They deserve something better than what they've been dealing with." I could feel it then. Not anger. Not yet. Just a quiet pressure building somewhere deeper. Something old. Something familiar. "If you have a problem with it," she continued, "then maybe you should sell the house and come back to town, where you can actually be useful." The line went silent before I could respond. No goodbye. No hesitation. Just certainty. I sat there for a long moment, the phone still in my hand, the lake now dark and still in front of me. The peace I had felt just hours earlier, gone. Replaced by something colder. Something sharper. Because it wasn't just what she said. It was the way she said it so easily. As if everything I had built, everything I had earned, could be reassigned with a single phone call. And in that silence, with the last light disappearing behind the trees, I understood something clearly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a line being crossed. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't going to step back. I didn't build that life in a year, or even a decade. That house by the lake, it wasn't luck. It was 32 years of showing up when no one was watching, and staying long after everyone else had gone home. I started in construction when I was barely 20. Back then, my hands were soft, my back didn't ache in the mornings, and I still believed hard work would speak for itself. It doesn't. Not unless you keep speaking with it every single day. 6 days a week, sometimes 7. 60-hour weeks that turned into 70 when deadlines closed in. Winter mornings where the cold cut through gloves like they weren't even there. Summer afternoons where the heat pressed down so hard it felt like the air itself was working against you. I learned early how to eat standing up, how to finish lunch in 10 minutes because breaks were a luxury. Most days, it was a sandwich from a cooler, warm by noon, eaten sitting on a pile of lumber or the back step of a truck. I watched other men leave the site, laughing, heading to diners, ordering hot meals. I stayed, because every dollar had a place to go. Every hour had a purpose. There were birthdays I missed. Ball games I only heard about later. Evenings where I came home too tired to speak, falling asleep in a chair before the television finished warming up the room. Daniel grew up watching that. He never said much about it, but he understood. He saw the way I counted every expense, the way I fixed things myself instead of replacing them. The way I treated overtime was not like a burden, but like an opportunity. Not because I loved the work, but because I had something in mind. A place, quiet, far from noise, far from people who only showed up when they needed something. A place where I could finally hear my own thoughts again. When I signed the papers for that cabin, the pen felt heavier than it should have. Not because of the price, but because of what it represented. Every skipped vacation, every cold morning, every meal is eaten alone on a job site. All of it turned into something real. 3 bedrooms, a dock that stretched into still water, 2 acres of pine trees that whispered when the wind moved through them. It wasn't just a house, it was proof. Proof that time, when spent the right way, doesn't disappear. It builds. I remember holding the keys in my hand that day. Simple metal, nothing special to look at, but they carried weight, because they weren't just opening a door. They were closing something else. The years of waiting, the years of pushing through, the years of putting everything and everyone ahead of myself. For the first time, I had something that was mine, not shared, not borrowed, not negotiated, earned. And maybe that's why her words hit the way they did. Because when Lauren talked about that house, she didn't see any of it. She didn't see the mornings, the sacrifices, the cost. To her, it was just space, empty rooms, something to be reassigned. But to me, that place by the lake wasn't empty. It was full of every hour I had ever worked, every choice I had made, every piece of my life built into something solid. And I knew, sitting there in the fading light, there was no version of this where I simply handed it over. Because giving up that house wouldn't just be giving up property. It would be giving up the only thing I had ever truly finished building. The phrase didn't leave my mind that night. Family helps family. It sounded simple, almost kind. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized it had never really meant what it claimed to mean. Because in my experience, it always came with a direction. One way. Toward me. I had heard it before, not from strangers, but from people who knew exactly how to use it. People who understood that if you wrap a demand in the language of loyalty, it becomes harder to refuse. Lauren wasn't the first. She was just the first to say it so openly. The next morning, Daniel called. His voice was softer than usual, careful, like he was choosing each word before it left his mouth. "Dad, can we talk about what Lauren said?" I stood by the kitchen window, watching the lake move under a gray sky. "We can," I said, "but I want to hear what you think first." There was a pause, long enough to say everything he wasn't saying. "I just think maybe it's temporary," he replied. "They're going through a rough time. And your place? It has the space." Space. That word again, as if that's all it was. "You think I should let them move in?" I asked. "I think it would help everyone," he said quietly. Not yes, not no, just somewhere in between. That was Daniel, always trying to keep the peace, even if it meant standing in the middle, while both sides pulled. I could hear something else in his voice, too. Not conviction. Pressure. "She's right here, isn't she?" I asked. Silence. Then a small exhale. "Yeah." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Of course she was. This wasn't a conversation. It was a performance, and he was caught in it. "Daniel, I said, keeping my voice steady. Do you remember how many times I said yes when I should have said no? Another pause. This one is heavier. I don't know what you mean, he said. I let out a slow breath. I helped when people needed money. I showed up when no one else did. I kept things running, even when it cost me more than I could afford. And every time, it was called the same thing. Family helping family. I turned away from the window and leaned against the counter. But tell me something, I continued. How many times did that help go the other direction? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because we both knew. Dad, it's not like that, he said finally. They're not trying to take advantage of you. No, I replied calmly. They just decided what I should give, without asking me. That was the difference. Not the request. The assumption. I could hear Lauren's voice faintly in the background, sharp, impatient, guiding the conversation without ever being on the line. Daniel lowered his voice. She's just stressed, he said. Her parents don't have anywhere else to go. And that becomes my responsibility? I asked. Their family. I closed my eyes for a moment. There it was again. That word. Used like a key, meant to unlock whatever it was pointed at. Daniel, I said quietly, they are her family. And you're mine. That seemed to land, because for a moment, everything went still. I'm not asking you to choose, I added, but I am telling you, I'm done being the solution to problems I didn't create. He didn't argue. He didn't push. And that told me more than anything else. Because if this had truly been his idea, he would have fought for it. Instead, he stood there, caught between loyalty and pressure, trying to hold both sides together. But I had already seen this pattern before. Different faces, different situations, same outcome. Give a little, then a little more, until one day, there's nothing left that's actually yours. I looked out at the lake again, still, quiet, unmoved. And for the first time, I understood something clearly. This wasn't about helping. It was about expectation. And I had spent too many years letting that expectation decide for me. Not anymore. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't even argue. But something shifted the moment that call ended. Something quiet and final. For years, I had been the man who adjusted. The one who found a way to make things work, even when they shouldn't. The one who said yes, not because it was right, but because it was easier than conflict. That man was still there, but he wasn't in control anymore. I sat at the kitchen table long after the light had faded from the lake. No television, no music, just silence, and the sound of a pencil moving across paper. I pulled out an old legal pad from my bag, the same kind I used for work, back when every project needed a plan, before the first nail was driven. I wrote one word at the top of the page. Control. Then I underlined it, because that's what this was really about. Not space. Not family. Control. They had already decided what would happen. Already made arrangements. Already built a future that included my home, without ever including me. That wasn't a request. That was a takeover. I turned the page and began to write again. Facts first. Always facts. They had no legal right to the property. No agreement. No permission. Everything they were planning existed on assumption, not reality. That mattered. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. Then I stood up and walked to the window. The lake was dark now, the surface barely moving, the trees standing still like they were waiting for something. I realized something then. This wasn't going to be solved with emotion. Not with anger. And certainly not with another conversation. Because conversations only work when both sides are listening. Lauren wasn't listening. She was deciding. So I would do the same, but differently. I sat back down and started outlining steps. Not reactions. Steps. Who to call. What to confirm. What needed to be documented. Every possibility. Written out clearly. The way I had done hundreds of times before, on job sites, where one mistake could cost everything. There was no rush. That was the difference now. They were moving fast, assuming I would follow. I wasn't. I would move carefully, deliberately, on my terms. Around midnight, I finally put the pencil down. The page in front of me was full, not chaotic, not emotional, structured, clear. For the first time since that phone call, I felt calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from avoiding a problem, but the kind that comes from understanding it completely. I looked at the word at the top of the page again. Control. Then I added one more line beneath it. Say no. And mean it. Because that was the part I had missed for too many years. Saying no wasn't enough. You had to be willing to hold it. I folded the paper neatly and set it beside the coffee maker for the morning. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, moving through the trees with a low, steady sound. Everything was still where it belonged. And this time, so was I. The next morning, I didn't act out of anger. I followed the plan. The first call I made was to the township office. A calm voice answered, professional, routine. I recently purchased a property on Anchor Point Road, I said. I'd like to understand the regulations regarding long-term guests. There was no hesitation on her end. She explained everything clearly: occupancy limits, registration requirements, liability considerations. I didn't interrupt. I wrote everything down, word for word. When she mentioned that any guest staying beyond a certain period had to be formally registered, I asked her to repeat it. Not because I didn't understand, because I wanted it exactly. Unregistered occupants can create legal exposure for the property owner, she said. I thanked her and ended the call. One piece in place. The second call went to my insurance agent. Jack had handled my policies for nearly 3 decades. He knew me well enough to recognize when I wasn't calling for small talk. Everything all right? He asked. Just reviewing coverage, I replied, specifically regarding additional occupants. There was a brief pause. Then his tone shifted, more focused. Your current policy covers you as the sole resident, he explained. Any additional long-term occupants would need to be declared. Otherwise, you could risk voiding parts of your coverage. Risk. That word mattered. Even if they're family? I asked. Especially then, he said, because liability doesn't care about relationships. I wrote that down too. Every detail, every condition, every consequence. Because this wasn't about what felt right. It was about what could be proven. By mid-morning, I drove into town. The hardware store sat at the corner like it had been there longer than anyone could remember. Inside, the owner greeted me with a nod. What can I help you with? Security cameras, I said. Motion activated, outdoor. He walked me through the options. Night vision, remote access, real-time alerts. I chose 3. 1 for the driveway, 1 for the front entrance, 1 facing the front and back sides of the house. Not excessive, just complete. Most folks use these for wildlife, he said as he rang them up. Deer, mostly. I gave a small nod. Something like that. Back at the cabin, I installed them myself. Carefully. Positioned for coverage, not visibility. Tested each angle. Adjusted for blind spots. Checked the signal strength until everything connected seamlessly to my phone. No gaps. No assumptions. Everything recorded. Everything documented. By the afternoon, there was one final step. I drove to the law office on the edge of town. Evelyn Carter met me in a small conference room, her posture straight, her expression direct. I laid out the situation without emotion. Facts only. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she folded her hands on the table. Mr. Hayes, she said, you are under no obligation to allow anyone onto your property without your consent. Simple. Clear. But if they show up anyway? I asked. That becomes trespassing, she replied, and you have every legal right to have them removed. I held her gaze for a moment. Then I'd like to retain your services. She nodded once. No surprise. No hesitation. The paperwork was signed within minutes. Retainer paid. Representation secured. By the time I drove back to the lake, the system was complete. Not emotional. Not reactive. Structured. Every angle covered. Every risk accounted for. They thought this was about pressure. About pushing until I gave in. But pressure only works when there's uncertainty. And there was none left. Because I wasn't preparing for a conversation anymore. I was preparing for an outcome. And this time, I wasn't the one adjusting. The alert came through my phone just after noon. A single vibration, then the image. A rental car was turning slowly onto the gravel road, tires crunching as it pushed through the line of pine trees toward the house. Right on time. I didn't move right away. I watched. The camera angle held steady as the car rolled to a stop in front of the cabin, engine idling, doors opening one by one. Victor Collins stepped out first. Tall, stiff posture. The kind of man who carried himself like every place he entered already belonged to him. Margaret followed, brushing at her coat, looking around with thinly veiled disapproval, as if the silence itself were inconvenient. I set my phone down. No rush. No reaction. Then I walked to the front door and stepped outside. They saw me immediately. Victor gave a short nod, not quite a greeting, more like acknowledgement. "Richard," he said, extending his hand. I didn't take it. "Victor, Margaret." A brief pause settled between us. He withdrew his hand slowly, not embarrassed, just adjusting. "Bit of confusion at the airport," he said. "We expected you to pick us up." "There was no confusion," I replied calmly. "I never agreed to that." Margaret's expression tightened. "Lauren said everything was arranged," she said, "that we'd be staying here for a while." "Lauren doesn't own this property," I said. "I do." Victor took a step closer. The tone shifted. Subtle but deliberate. "Let's not make this difficult," he said. "We're all family here." Daniel and Lauren agreed this was the best solution. I held his gaze. "They can agree to whatever they want," I said. "It doesn't apply to this house." Silence. The kind that stretches just long enough to force the truth into the open. Margaret crossed her arms. "You're one man in a 3-bedroom house," she said sharply. "Refusing to help family when you have more than enough space. That's not a good look." I almost smiled. Not because it was amusing, but because it was familiar. The same argument. The same tone. Just different voices. I didn't spend 32 years working to build this place so strangers could move into it, I said evenly. "We're not strangers," Victor snapped. "You are to me." That landed. Harder than anything else. His jaw tightened, his posture shifting from polite to confrontational. "This is unreasonable," he said. "We drove 3 hours to get here. We're not turning around because of a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," I replied. "You're not staying here." Margaret stepped forward now. "This is selfish," she said. "You have more than you need, and you're choosing not to share it." I let that sit for a moment. Then I spoke. "I earned everything you're looking at," I said. "Every inch of it. And I decide who stays here. Not Lauren, not Daniel, not you." Victor's voice dropped lower. More controlled. More dangerous. "We're not leaving," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy, deliberate. I nodded once, then reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "Then I'll call the sheriff," I said. That changed something. Not immediately, but enough. Margaret looked at Victor. Victor looked back at the house, then at me, calculating. "You'd really do that?" she asked. "Yes." No hesitation. No explanation. Just the truth. The cameras were still recording. Every word. Every movement. Everything documented. Victor exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders shifting. "This isn't over," he said. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." He turned without another word and walked back to the car. Margaret lingered for a second longer, her eyes sharp, searching for something to push against. There was nothing there, because I had already made the decision. She followed him. The car doors slammed shut, the engine started, gravel scattering, as they reversed down the driveway. I stood there until the sound disappeared into the trees. Then I walked back inside. picked up my phone, and reviewed the footage. Clear. Complete. Undeniable. For the first time since all of this started, there was no pressure, no expectation, no negotiation. Just a line. And it had been drawn. I didn't tell Daniel everything that weekend. Not yet. Because suspicion, without proof, only creates more noise. And I had spent enough years watching noise turn into excuses. So instead, I made one more call. Rachel Morgan answered on the second ring. Her voice was steady, efficient, the kind of tone that didn't waste time on unnecessary questions. I need a background check, I said. Financial, employment, anything you can find. Lauren and her parents, Victor and Margaret Collins. There was a brief pause. Personal or legal? She asked. Both, I replied, and I need it clean, documented. You'll have it, she said. Give me a week. I didn't follow up. I didn't rush her. Because the difference between guessing and knowing is patience. 7 days later, the report arrived. Thick. Organized. Every page labeled, cross-referenced, built to stand on its own. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it slowly. No assumptions. Just facts. Victor Collins. Casino records. Losses totaling over $30,000 within 18 months. Frequent visits, irregular patterns, escalating risk. Margaret Collins. Terminated from her last retail position. Internal report cited inventory discrepancies, a clean way of saying theft. Multiple incidents. Unresolved. Then Lauren. Employment history. Short-term positions. Terminations. 4 months unemployed, with no disclosure. Bank statements attached. Withdrawals from joint accounts. Regular. Consistent. Money moving out, not in. Total estimate. Over $60,000. I leaned back in the chair and let the pages rest in my hands. It wasn't surprising. Not really. What surprised me was how clean it all looked on paper. No emotion. No excuses. Just a pattern. A system built on taking and calling it necessity. That evening, Daniel came by again. He looked tired, the kind of tired that doesn't come from work. We sat on the dock like we always did. 2 beers between us, the lake quiet, the sky beginning to fade. Dad, I need to ask you something, he said. I didn't answer. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the report, and handed it to him. Read it, I said. He frowned slightly, confused. Then he started. At first, his eyes moved quickly, scanning, trying to make sense of it. Then slower. Line by line, the silence stretched. The only sound was the water moving against the dock, steady, unchanged. His hands tightened on the pages. That's not, he began, then stopped. He flipped to the next section, and the next. Each page stripped away something he had been holding on to. They told me they were just struggling, he said quietly, that they needed help getting back on their feet. I didn't interrupt, because this wasn't about what I knew. It was about what he was finally seeing. His voice dropped. We gave them money, he said, a lot of money. I nodded once. How much? He didn't answer immediately. Then, 50,000, he said. The number hung in the air. Heavy. Final. That was Emma's college fund, he added, almost to himself. I watched him carefully. Not his words. His reaction. Because this was the moment that mattered. Not the report. Not the evidence. But what he chose to do with it. She lied to me, he said finally. Not loud. Not angry. Just clear. Yes, I replied. He looked out across the lake. Long, silent, processing something deeper than just numbers. She lied about her job, he said. About the money. About everything. The truth didn't break him. It stripped him. Of assumptions. Of trust. Of the story he had been living in. And when he looked back at me, there was something different in his eyes. Not confusion. No hesitation. Understanding. For the first time, He wasn't standing in the middle anymore. He was seeing the line. It didn't take long for Lauren to respond. Not with an apology, not with denial, but with something else entirely. The letter arrived in the mail on a gray morning, folded cleanly inside an official envelope. Minnesota Department of Human Services. I didn't open it right away. I already knew. Because people like Lauren don't retreat when they lose control. They escalate. Inside was a formal notice. A report had been filed. Concerns about my mental state, my ability to live independently, allegations of unsafe conditions, cognitive decline, isolation. I read it once, then again, slowly, carefully, not because I believed it, but I wanted to understand how far she was willing to go. I set the paper down on the table. No anger, no surprise, just confirmation. She wasn't trying to win an argument anymore. She was trying to remove me from the equation. I picked up the phone and called Evelyn Carter. She filed a report, I said. There was a brief pause, then a quiet exhale. That happens more often than you think, Evelyn replied. It's a pressure tactic. Stay calm. Let them come. We'll handle it. 2 days later, the social worker arrived. Susan Blake. Professional. Neutral. She stepped inside, clipboard in hand, eyes moving quietly through the room. I didn't rush to explain anything. I showed her the house. The organized tools in the garage. The documents are neatly filed. The kitchen is clean. The systems are in place. Everything exactly as it was. Because the truth doesn't need to be adjusted. Mr. Hayes, she said after a while, is there any family conflict that might have prompted this report? Yes, I answered. My daughter-in-law wants control of this property. I refused. She nodded slightly, writing something down. That aligns with what I'm seeing, she said. No emotion. Just observation. The visit lasted less than an hour. A week later, the case was closed. Unfounded. But Lauren wasn't finished. She shifted tactics. This time, through Daniel. He called late that evening. His voice was different. Flat. Measured. Rehearsed. Dad, I've been thinking, he said. Maybe it's time you consider selling the house. I didn't respond immediately. I listened. Being out there alone, it's a lot, he continued. Lauren's worried. We both are. I closed my eyes for a moment, not because I was unsure, because I recognized the pattern. Daniel, I said quietly, are those your words or hers? Silence. Then a breath. She's standing here, he admitted. Of course she was. Still directing. Still controlling. Even now. I understand, I said. Tell her I received the message. I ended the call before he could answer. Not out of anger, but because there was nothing left to discuss. The pressure had reached its peak. Not through logic. Not through conversation. But through manipulation. Through systems. Through him. I sat at the table in the quiet that followed, the lake outside still, untouched by any of it. And I realized something clearly. This wasn't about property anymore. It wasn't even about family. It was about control. And she had just shown me exactly how far she was willing to go to get it. The call came late. Later than usual. And this time, Daniel didn't hesitate when I answered. It's all true, he said. No greeting. No build-up. Just the truth, laid out in 4 words. I didn't interrupt, because I could hear it in his voice. Something had broken. I confronted her, he continued. Everything. The job, the money, the report she filed against you. His breathing was uneven, not loud, but controlled in a way that meant he was holding something back. And she admitted it, he said. There was a pause. Long enough for the weight of that to settle. All of it. I leaned back slowly in my chair, staring out at the dark water beyond the window. How much? I asked. Another pause. Then, more than we thought, he said quietly. Over 60,000. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not because I didn't expect it, but because hearing it out loud made it real. That was Emma's college fund, he added. Some of it came from accounts I didn't even know existed. There it was. Not just deception. Control. She hadn't just lied to him. She had been living a completely different reality, using his trust as the foundation. She told me they needed help, he said, that it was temporary, that they were trying to get back on their feet. And now? I asked. He let out a breath that sounded almost empty. Now I know there was no back on their feet, he said. There was just more taking. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was clear. For the first time in all of this, there was no confusion left. I asked her why, he said after a while. I didn't move. What did she say? That you deserved it, he replied, for embarrassing her parents. I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see it. That was the final piece. Not regret. Not guilt. Just justification. And once someone reaches that point, there's nothing left to fix. What are you going to do? I asked. This time, there was no hesitation. I already told her to leave, he said. The words came out steady, not emotional. Decided. She's staying at a motel with them for now. Her lawyers already reached out. I let that sit for a moment. How are you holding up? He didn't answer right away. Then, better than I thought, he said. It's strange, but once I saw everything clearly, it felt like something lifted. Not relief. Exactly. But release. From something that had been holding him in place without him realizing it. I should have listened to you, he added quietly. No, I said. You trusted your wife. That's not a mistake. It is when the trust is built on lies, he replied. There was no bitterness in his voice. Just understanding. The kind that only comes after something falls apart completely. I found more, he said. Credit cards in my name. Accounts I never opened. It's going to take time to sort everything out. It will, I said. But you'll sort it. Another pause. Then his voice softened slightly. I'm sorry, Dad. For what? For letting her turn me against you. I looked out at the lake again. The surface still. Steady. Unchanged by any of it. You came back, I said. That's what matters. And for the first time since this began, there was nothing left between us that needed to be said. Because the truth had already done the work. It had stripped everything down to what was real. And what was real was enough. Spring came slowly that year. The ice broke apart into quiet pieces, drifting across the lake until the water finally opened again. And with it, something else did too. Daniel started coming up more often. Not out of obligation, not because someone asked him to, but because he wanted to be there. Sometimes we fished. Sometimes we just sat on the dock, saying very little, letting the silence do what words couldn't. Then one weekend, he didn't come alone. Dad, this is Emily, he said, a quiet smile in his voice. Emily Carter. She shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye. No hesitation, no performance. Different. Not better in a way that needed to be said out loud. Just real. We spent the day on the water. She laughed when she made mistakes, asked questions, listened when Daniel spoke. No tension. No control. Just presence. And for the first time in a long while, I saw him at ease. Not pulled in two directions. Not trying to hold something together that was already broken. Just himself. Over time, things settled. The divorce was finalized. The noise faded. And what remained was simple. He found a small place near Duluth. Started rebuilding, piece by piece. And every now and then, he'd come back to the lake. Not to escape, but to belong. One evening, as the sun dropped low behind the trees, he sat beside me and said something I didn't expect. I want my kids to know this place someday. I looked out across the water, the same view I had imagined all those years ago, and I realized something. I bought this house for peace, for silence, for distance. But peace isn't about being alone. It's about being with the right people. People who don't take, don't manipulate, don't turn love into leverage. People who choose to be there without being asked. Money can build a house. It can even protect it, but it will never earn respect. That has to be given freely. And sometimes, the strongest thing you can do for your family. I say no when it matters most. So let me ask you something. If you were in my position, would you have opened the door or closed it for good?